Well, hello there, and welcome to another Mission Unstoppable. I'm so excited for you to meet my guest today. Her name is Dr. Wendy Smith. She's a retired clinical professor of social work, a former associate dean at USC's Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work. With 35 years in private practice, she worked extensively with survivors of childhood maltreatment, and she brings deep insight into the long-term impact of trauma. Now, her book, Before Their Crimes, What We're Misunderstanding About Childhood Trauma, Youth Crime, and the Path to Healing, explores why some children commit serious offenses and what we're missing about the connection between the childhood trauma and youth crime. I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Wendy Smith. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be with you.
Thank you. What an amazing book, an experience that you had interviewing these 29 individuals.
Yes.
Most of them are already out of prison at the point
Yes, I originally, when I was planning to write the book, I thought I would also try to speak to people who were still incarcerated. But as it turns out, the obstacles to having the kind of interviews I was having were substantial. You couldn't use a recorder for one thing.
Oh, okay.
And on the phone, the people who are incarcerated are limited to 15 minutes at a time. And these
that's an issue.
Yes.
That would be an issue for sure.
Right. These were like 90-minute interviews. So
yeah. Wow. Yeah. You know, I'm going to be honest. When I first was pitched the book and they showed me, and you know, you think, well, these are people. They have a mind of their own. They should know right and wrong. They should know that they're doing something bad. But the more you get into the book and the more I read about their stories and their individual stories, the more it clicked in my brain that their trauma, their at the time of their traumatization, let's say, development inside their brains, it differs at each age and stage. So let's talk a little bit about that and see if we can unlock that for the listeners here.
That's absolutely one of the main points of what I was trying to say. Because when bad things happen to any of us, it's traumatic and, you know, it affects us. But when you're small, and the smaller you are, the earlier in your development these things happen, the more it affects the way you develop. In other words, we are a product not only of our genes and not only of our relationships, but also of our experiences. And what develops our good things, you know, our potentials that are positive and our potentials that aren't so positive are reinforced by the things that happen to us. So, for example, if you as a very young child are abused, you learn to be on alert. Your stress system has to respond to dangerous moments frequently. And it's dysregulating as your stress system is being built. You know, like if you get close to coming in an accident, that you feel a surge of adrenaline, you might feel flushed and prickly, that's your stress response. If that's getting set off very frequently, it becomes unreliable. It either can't turn off or it turns off entirely. And so these kids don't respond to what happens next in the way that they would if they had a well-functioning stress response system.
Yeah. And I think you wrote in the book something before the age of 5, you know, many of the children are present at the time of abuse of a parent, let's say.
Yes.
And under 14, something else happens to them, to their brain. Do you remember writing that?
Well, I think the first 5 years are the most critical years for brain development. But in adolescence, there are further important developments. And also, you're going through puberty.
Right.
So what I spoke about in the book and what I saw with so many of these people was how middle school was a turning point. Because that's when things for a lot of people went downhill.
Went south, yeah.
Yes, and partly it's this combination of, you know, the main changes that are happening to your body and your hormones, and combined with social, risks and opportunities that you're now facing. And when you don't have a solid base at home, or you don't have a good stress response system, you're much more vulnerable to high risk activities. I mean, teenagers, as we know, are much more open to exciting experiences. They need them and they want them.
Right.
Now, a lot of things that can happen during puberty that are exciting might not be very good for you and might lead you astray,
Right. Yes.
from the more pro-social activities.
Yeah. The
So
one thing
yeah,
in junior high that happens in going through adolescence is that you actually have a tribe because they're all going through it pretty much at the same time. So the parents are gone, like they're out of the picture in a lot
yes,
of, for
that's
most
right.
kids, let's say. And
They're in
these
the
people, but
wings.
they're the wings, and these people that you go to school with or hang out with that become the most important in your life.
That's right. That's
And
right.
and so if you fall to the wrong tribe, but
And for many of these people, for example, that's the age where you do look to your peers more. And you also, if your earlier experiences haven't been that positive, you're looking for acceptance and approval and support and love. And gangs very often offer that.
right,
They are like a new family that will take you in with no questions. All you have to do is conform to the things they do.
right. And a lot of these kids knew in instance that if I come here, man, this is going to change everything for me.
Yeah,
I know that this is not right, but back home is not good. So
yeah,
I'm going to stick with this new family. What's interesting, the level of abuse that so many of them went through, whether, the parents were drug addicted, the physical abuse never stopped, the sexual abuse never stopped, going into homes,
right.
every step of the way, there was people there that allowed all this behavior. Nobody ever stepped in and said, you know what, this isn't good. Even when the teachers called and said, this child's worn the same clothes for a month, I think there's something going on.
That's
They
right.
were they were put back in the same home. They
That's
believed
right.
that step parent, or she was a children's aide or whatever she was. So I know that social workers always go, oh, but there's only one of me and I'm so busy. My workload is over. What's the answer here? Because man, like this is not good. To
No,
say the least is not good.
no,
We
you're
have to
so
give
right.
these kids some autonomy to be believed and to dig deeper when a child says something's going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest failures we have currently as a society is what happens when kids are showing you by their behavior in school. I mean, everybody comes to school, so
Right.
it's the place where we can see all children, where they might not be seen anywhere else. And that's the opportunity to intervene. But what we see so often is kids' grades fall off or their attendance falls off. And what happens? Nobody says, hey, what's going on with you? In most instances.
Right.
Instead, they get expelled or suspended. And who do they meet when they go to continuation school? Other kids who are just as alienated and under attended as they are.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, I can understand the teachers. They've got a lot of them
A
have a
lot.
big classroom, school class, new teachers. Oh, I can't call their parents. What if I make a mistake? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm this and that? Like, this would be really bad for me. Maybe they'll fire me. Uh, but then you call the police and you call these people in authority that you hope would help, and they don't do anything. They're just as jaded as these kids.
I think I think there are a lot of well-intentioned people in all these systems, but I think you're right. They have a lot to manage, and often that individual child's needs get lost in the larger system. One of the things that I really think could make a huge difference is if we invested more in schools being a place of intervention.
Yeah.
not only of education, because it's our opportunity to
Yeah.
set eyes on people. I mean, there were a lot of people in my book who were seriously neglected or mistreated, and it flew under the radar. I
Totally.
mean, totally. It wasn't like Child Protective Services even knew. So that is, but school is someplace where things show up. So if we invested more, I think, in helping school personnel to respond to these things, I mean, it would take an investment
It would.
because they already have a lot to do.
Right. It would have to
So
be a
if,
new department, new people taught,
yes,
trained to do this, but it would be totally worth it. And I think, this children's aid and people who take in kids for money, that system needs to be overhauled as well. It totally needs to be overhauled.
yeah,
Because they don't, a lot of them don't care. They're there for the money. And nobody is really going into that home and going, oh, where are they sleeping? What are they doing? They're not, are they eating? No. So any system that you're paying people to look after children, like it has to be a little bit better regulated than, oh, they're willing to do it. It's a bad, oh, thank God somebody's going to house them for me.
but I
Yeah.
think, I do think as a society, I mean, I can't speak about Canada
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
don't know, but here at least, I think there is not enough appreciation for the importance of childhood experience and how it sets the foundation for the future. If
Yeah.
we invested more in childhood, we'd have to invest less in public assistance.
Like a lot of those children that or the adults that you interviewed
Yeah,
as children, they liked school. They liked
yeah.
learning. They were good at it. And then this abuse happened and they fell off. And that was the end of it. It's the only kind of place where they actually had a little bit of self-esteem. Let's just talk about self-esteem. I don't know if it differs in men and women, but I know for women, it's definitely something that a lot of women are lacking in. But let's talk about that a little bit.
I don't think it differs in a big way. I mean, maybe for women or girls, there's a little bit too much and much more than for boys attention to the physical person.
Right.
But I think self esteem is very important for everybody. And for everybody, you don't get there by yourself.
Right.
Self esteem really depends on your reception in the world. So if people, like in infancy even, if you're handled with tenderness and care, like you're a precious little person,
Yeah.
that communicates. You can't put it together in words, but you experience yourself as being a valued person.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, if your needs aren't met, if nobody's really asking you about the school day or taking care of your meals in a regular way, that sends you a message. It's more than not having those things. It sends a message that you as a person don't merit attention and love.
Yes.
And now that you raise it, I mean, I would say that underneath so much of the, violent, aggressive acting out was really a longing for love, feeling unloved, feeling enraged about it, and feeling desperate about it.
Yeah. I mean, I can just imagine why don't my parents, especially when you're the child that is unloved and the others are loved in the family. That has to be like the worst to say what's going on here. Now, what amazed me was I can understand the abuse, the physical abuse, kids being, mishandled. But it was also when a parent died that these
Yes,
kids set them off on their criminal behavior. You
yes,
can't help. I mean, you die, you die. Like lots of homes have parents who die and those children go
that's
on to
right.
be functioning
And
adults.
and it should be said that even many kids who are maltreated go on to be well
Functioning.
functioning
Yeah.
adults. It's not like every person who has a bad experience. It's really more a question of what else exists. So, for example, with the people who lost their parents very early, there's one chapter that has 3 stories about that.
Hmm.
And in those cases, that child's world essentially came apart. the surviving parent was grief-stricken and had to worry about providing for everybody, or the parent who died was the person who was central in that child's life, and the other parent, if there was one, or the grandparent, was less central. But the fabric that, or the foundation that held the family together kind of disintegrated.
Right.
And these children were kind of floundering. And one boy, 1 minute,
No worries.
one boy whose father died and who was, you know, terribly grief-stricken, sought other fathers, and one of the next ones abused him sexually. So that left him with an additional load of mistrust and feeling that that no one could love him in a healthy way. And then when his mother remarried, he thought he might have found a new family, but that also fell apart. So what I'm saying is that death in itself is hard to manage,
right?
But it really depends what are the other circumstances, or the boy whose mother killed herself.
Yeah.
And who, died in front of him, essentially.
Right. Yeah. That was horrific. The amount of predators that are out there is astounding to me.
I mean, I think one of my main takeaways really was the immense sadness of their early lives.
Yeah.
And that, we like to think of childhood as kind of one of the best parts of life, full of joy and discovery. And yet for so many kids, it isn't.
No.
And they're so vulnerable.
Yeah. And aside from school, I mean, I don't know if it made a difference. Light bulbs went off my head, but I don't know if it made a difference. But before, in the olden days, like the 50s, the 60s, when people got married, a lot, like in the Catholic Church, they would have to go to church. They'd have to talk to the minister. Maybe he asked questions. How was your home life? I don't know. Before you have children, what do you think about having children? I don't know if we need to intervene at that part, even just before they get married, to find out what's your back. Like, do we need to? You can't regulate them having kids, obviously.
No.
But maybe if somebody took an interest in some of these young people.
That's, I think, a very good suggestion. And in some communities now, one of the more promising things that's happening is the well baby visits from a nurse to new infants and their families, which is a perfect moment to support new parents, to give them information about what their babies need. I mean, that's, I think, you may not be able to have everybody in premarital or pre-parenting counseling, but you could have in communities everywhere this kind of visit for every new baby and their family. And I think that would be a good start.
Yeah. Let's talk about this immense exposure to psychotropic drugs and giving these children drugs when they go into a group home, they go into a detention center. Maybe they're just even in at home themselves, and they're going, oh, let's just medicate them. They're a problem. What are we doing to their hormones? What are we doing to their brain as it's establishing, like what's going on with this? Who came up with that great idea?
Yeah, you're right. We don't know the long-term effects of these drugs, which have not, in the, span of history, been around very long.
And I'm not even talking about a teenager. I'm talking about a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old. Like, this is ridiculous.
Well, I can tell you that in Los Angeles, at least, where I was for many years served on the Commission for Children and Families, that there's much more attention to any prescribers that are prescribing the most powerful antipsychotic drugs to young children. That is being very closely watched. And I'm sure that's true in other jurisdictions. But it's also true that foster kids disproportionately receive psychotropic medicines. And many, a couple of the people who I interviewed had terrible experiences with, kind of a zombie-like existence for a while. And I think, in Los Angeles County, for example, kids have to have psychosocial treatment if they're also receiving drugs. In other words, psychotherapy. You can't just
Give them the
deliver
pill.
those drugs.
But a lot of them were in an institution.
But this was before. Yeah, this was some years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's true that in institutions and even in like a juvenile hall, some kids are given drugs for sleeping because a lot of them can't sleep. And so
I'm sure they don't feel safe going to sleep.
They don't feel safe, or they're very anxious, or they've had terrible experiences.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're depressed. But drugs are turned to very quickly. Much too quickly.
As far as childcare goes, let's say in the last few years, what kind of sorry, I'm trying to say, like, would a police get in, like, if I go work in a school today, I taught art in a school as a substitute, and I had to go to the police station. I had to get
checked out. Is that your work behind you?
It is one of my paintings. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you. What does that say about me? but I had to go and they had to check me out and make sure I didn't have it, wasn't a pervert or whatever the case might be, or had anything against me. Is that done regularly in the U.S. for these children? The parents.
Do you have to have a live scan or whatever? Yes. I mean, it's definitely done in juvenile institutions and child welfare agencies. Right. Yeah. And if you want to become a foster parent,
you have to get it done. Because I mean, even those foster parents were abusing their kids. And that was just, I mean, that one who, her children were on this beautiful side of the house, and these kids were like living in a root cellar, basically, with no food. How does that happen? There must have been a social worker who had to come and interview the children every couple months, or.
But when you're a child in that situation, you don't necessarily tell what's really going on. It's too frightening, and that the person is going to deliver some kind of punishment when that social worker leaves.
Wow. They really, they really have a lot against them, and I feel for these children so much. Now, you had the 29, and you wrote disproportionately, Black and Hispanic kids are going to be more, not more abused, but more likely to be in trouble, incarcerated, let's say. Maybe it is because of the abuse, maybe it is because of low income, maybe it's because of a whole lot of other factors. But that was in the US. So I don't know if that translates to other countries where they're more of the same or not. But the trauma would translate the same, I would expect.
Yeah, I think trauma, it doesn't recognize ethnicity at all. And I think part of the reason more kids of color are incarcerated or are in child welfare situations has as much to do with being more surveilled and biases along the way at decision points. I mean, they have higher rates of expulsions, suspensions from school, not because their behavior is worse, but they are more, looked at and judged more harshly often.
Right. Which is so unfortunate, so sad. The young girl who killed her grandmother in the book.
Yes.
She got to a state, let me see, what was it? It was called Tonic Immobility. Let's talk about that, where she couldn't stop. She couldn't move. She couldn't even say, I don't want this anymore. Let's stop this. What happens with that tonic immobility?
I think it's an animal and a human phenomenon where in moments of extreme fear or duress, you freeze. Little babies sometimes who are severely abused can have these kind of moments of freezing. Yeah, I mean, usually our instinct is fight or flight.
Right.
But it's also possible to just be completely immobilized. my fear.
So in Parasite, like I mean, that was
Yes,
basically what she
killing a
did,
parent,
killing
right.
a parent or a family
And
member.
she was a parent figure, this
Right.
grandmother.
So
Yeah,
that's only 2%, you said, I believe, of the population would actually, so it has to be like
that's right.
extreme
It's
for them to,
tiny, yes.
for them.
And the research on it suggests that when an adult kills a parent, it usually involves mental illness on the part of the adult who is murdering the parent. And when it's a young person or child, it's usually a matter of extreme abuse, usually sexual abuse.
I have to go to the Menendez brothers. We have to go there.
Yes, we do. I mean,
What were your
that's a
thoughts
case in point.
yeah, what were your thoughts on them?
My thoughts on them are much along the lines that we've been talking about, that from the age of 6, which is a pretty formidable age, their father was sexually abusing them, and their mother was standing by. Their father was a very powerful person in the entertainment community, and they adored him and looked up to him. I mean, that's the other complicating factor, that when your parent is the person, it's just an unsolvable dilemma, because you love that person and you want that person to love you, and yet he's hurting you and he's scaring you. And there's no way to resolve those. To get up in the morning and have breakfast across from the person who might that night do something very painful to you.
Right.
That is a tough way to live. And they lived that way for a long time, trying to please them. But the other thing is that you do have to think about how this affected their judgment and their stress response. So at that final day, where they became convinced that they were going to be killed because they had dared to resist and say, you can't do this anymore. I won't do it anymore. And his father showed Eric a gun at that point. They became convinced they were going to die. And, maybe one would ask oneself, is that a realistic response? Do you really think your parents are going to kill you? But if your parent has been raping you repeatedly for 12 years, I'm sure you could feel that anything is possible. And combine that with being at the age where your executive functions aren't yet fully developed. I mean, I think if it had been 10 years later, it wouldn't have happened, because they would have been able to think, I'm going to go to prison, or do I really want, or shouldn't I just leave somehow?
Like, I don't know why they didn't leave. Like, I left home at 17. Like, why? There's 2 of them. They could just go. They could
Well,
leave.
I think,
and they're men, so like they're boys, so it's a lot safer than when I left, I would think.
his father did say to him, even when he wanted to go away to college, no, you're not going away. You'll be here. I mean, I think they felt he had unlimited power and unlimited ways
Resources
of
to get them
controlling
back.
them. Yeah. I do think that whole, some people thought they did it for the money. I don't think money is ever the reason a young person kills someone, especially someone they know.
Yeah.
There's always something underneath that.
So they're unable to function. They're unable, some of them in the book were unable, they were numb. They were numb, they were paralyzed, they were unable to reason right from wrong any longer. That part of them was long gone. So how do you let them out in years to come? How do you let them out in years to come when they are still unable to reason this know inside right from wrong?
They don't remain that way. In other words,
They
growth,
don't?
no. I mean, it's not that something has been completely destroyed. It's partly that something has not yet fully developed. So, for example, a lot of the people who I spoke with who had served long years in prison, like the Menendez brothers, they had at first just acted out in prison, carried on with whatever they were doing, but eventually came to face themselves and what they had done and to become accountable for the harm they caused, to really understand and feel what their actions had done, not only to their own lives, but to other people, all the people that a death affects. And that is a possibility once you really face your own trauma, because so often it's hiding from your own trauma that allows you to be disconnected from other people. In other words, a lot of these people had feelings they never wanted to feel, hence the drugs or the violence. And part of not feeling your own feelings is that you don't really have to be bothered with the feelings of other people. You can kind of develop a callousness. Once you can, and that's why, for example, with domestic abusers, some of the treatment models involve having those people face their childhood trauma and what it felt like to be beaten, because that's often underneath. They're taking it out on their current partner.
Right.
Once you face your own trauma, it's possible to feel empathy for other people because you've allowed yourself to feel your own pain.
So they can move from this disassociative behavior. It's not like, oh, I know how to go there. I can just go there when I want.
Right. Well, and also it costs you something to dissociate because you can't really feel joy either. You can't just shut down selected feelings. You kind of have to shut your feeling self down. So when you bring it back and face your pain, you can also feel close to somebody or feel joy. And you can feel responsible and accountable. And from what I know about the Menendez brothers in prison, they made some mistakes, no question, but they did move to a place over those long years of wanting to help other people and of seeing that what they had done was deeply harmful, not only to the parents they killed, but to their entire family.
They got married in prison.
Yeah. Now that's a phenomenon I don't know a lot about. I know it happens, but I haven't explored that. It's
Who are these women?
And there are plenty.
Maybe there's another book for you there. I don't know.
And maybe, or someone.
Yeah.
Maybe not me. Yeah. But yes, that's a great subject deserving of exploration.
Yeah, that's really bizarre to me. Not that they don't deserve love. People deserve love, but how do you find them?
But it's so interesting that it occurs in that circumstance.
Yeah, it really
is. But my guess is there's something probably in the childhoods of those people who feel some kind of sympathetic connection.
I wonder if it's sympathy or if it's something else. Who knows?
Well, for example, the girl, in my book who killed her grandmother, that boy that she met who actually did the killing, part of what drew her to him was that they had both lost their mothers at age 3. And she felt they were like sympathetic. Yeah.
But even she was abhorred that he got.
Oh, she was horrified.
Yeah. And that he felt sexual satisfaction and showed physically that after he killed the grandmother, like she's like, what? What's
she
this?
Was horrified.
Yeah. Wow. Will they go on to abuse their children, do you think?
These particular individuals? I don't think so. Because I think they've really sorted that part of their lives out. I think the big danger is when you have been abused, you never deal with it, and it's triggered by something your child does. It's like instead of when your child is in pain, normally your response would be, it would set off your attachment feelings toward the child. And you will want to
Mhm.
hold the child close. When you've been traumatized and it's kind of sitting there, it can set off your own trauma reaction and you just want to
Yeah.
make it stop.
Yeah. And I understand that, because I understand that because sometimes something came out of my mouth that my mother had said to me. And I'm like, I didn't like that when you said it. Why am I saying this
Right?
same crap to my
No,
kids?
we learn how to parent from our parents for good and for ill.
Yeah.
And, we take it in and that's what we know
I got a
until
t-shirt. I
we,
got a t-shirt that said I survived the wooden spoon. I thought that was so funny.
was it a wooden spoon?
It was a wooden spoon. She never hit me
Wow,
with it, but it was always the wooden spoon, right? And I would sit on my bum and she couldn't get me. But it was there.
that's scary.
Yeah, it was there.
Well, I'm
I
glad you
actually
survived
laughed
it.
at it. Yeah. I used to kind of laugh. She didn't know, I don't think. But yeah, I was like, you're not going to get me. I don't know. But it's such a fascinating subject. And I'm really glad that you did write that book because I really was. Oh, so here's the next thing. When I heard that they were going to change the law and charge the parents for the crimes of their children, the first reaction is, well, I wasn't there. I didn't do it. Like, how can you charge me? That's not right. They're their own person. They're 18 or 20, whatever it is, or must have been under 18 if they're going to charge parents. So is there an instance where you think they should not or when they should?
I definitely think parents who make guns available to their children should have responsibility. No
Yes, I agree with
question.
that.
I mean, that is just, you're just handing them somebody's death,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
I think when it comes to kind of the relationship part of it, it gets very complicated. I mean, I personally think if a 12-year-old commits an act of serious violence, that 12-year-old needs treatment and is likely a victim of something
Right.
because I don't think it ever happens. I don't, I mean, maybe there's the occasional case of someone, let's say, who had traumatic brain injury as an infant and, you know, is for that reason uncontrollable and so forth. But I think as a kind of um,
Or maybe the father
relation,
died or the mother died. Like that's not really, it affected them, but you wouldn't know necessarily they're going to become violent from that.
that
Or,
no, I mean, as I say, it's not,
yeah, it's not black and white.
can you survive trauma without becoming a violent criminal? Of
Right.
course you can. Most of us do.
Right.
I mean, it's not a question of one or two terrible things happening. It's more like, as for some of these kids, five terrible things happening and nobody in the picture who
Right.
could provide a buffer of any kind, who could help you understand what's happening to you. It's really not that I think we can avoid bad things happening. I don't.
Are people so blind or are they just afraid to get involved?
Well, I'd say a little more about that.
Well, I mean, you might look at a family and go, I think there's something going on there.
Oh,
But, you know, it's intrusive. I don't really, even if
yeah,
it's my
I mean,
kids, like, is it my right to go in and say, hey, I don't like what's happening. I don't like the way you're parenting, or call the police because your neighbor, you see them abusing a child. Or, I mean, many people just feel they don't need to get involved. They don't want to get involved, or they just don't know what's going on.
well, I think there's no one easy answer. I think probably if I saw someone being abused, I would do something. If I thought, I don't think that's the greatest parenting technique, I probably wouldn't because not my business. But I
Right.
think when it comes to questions of safety and harm, I hope we would all step up to protect a child.
Right. I mean, we've all seen that the toddler taking the fit out in the middle of the mall and the mom like just dying. Like, what am I doing? I got these bags. I'm trying to get home. I got this kid
Yeah,
screaming. It's like, I'm at my wit's end. Somebody help me, please. But you got to get this kid off the floor and you got to go home. And,
yeah.
I remember my son coming home from grade 5 going, you can't hit me. I can call the police. We learned that in school today. Not that I hit them. I never did.
Right, right.
But if it ever happened, he knew that he could call the police.
That's right. I remember my children learning about child abuse at school too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, and then the Russell Peters did that bit about, well, but I can hit you before they come. You got to make a little bit light of it. Um, yeah, I mean, most kids are good. They're good. And hopefully
Yeah.
most parents
And most
are,
people survive trauma,
yeah.
but they usually have help to do it. They have someone to come. Let's say somebody gets bullied at school. They can come home and tell their mom or their dad and sit on their lap for a while or be reassured that, bullies are whatever they are, but that's not you.
I'm glad you brought that up because now with social media, the bullying is even a bigger, and it goes across
Yeah. Oh, it's
socioeconomic.
more than bullying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we're seeing young people killing themselves, girls killing themselves, being body shamed, being whatever. Um, what effect? I mean, we know the effect that it's having, but I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if you know this, but they've talked about how social media, being on an iPad for young children, they're being self-soothed with this. I see them, putting it in front of them for having dinner. Oh, they don't eat unless they can watch it, and then they're like numbed out. You can't even
Yeah.
hear you talk to them anymore. Is it changing their brain?
I think to some extent it is, and it's, as you say, it's changing their coping mechanisms. Instead of learning to deal with their feelings, they kind of handle it by looking at something on a screen. So I think there's a lot of talk now about the limits that should be put on that, which I definitely agree with.
I do
I,
too.
yeah, I think it's not the greatest thing for kids, especially adolescents.
Yeah. I mean, we used to insist on sitting down as a family and talking at dinner time, and there was no TV on at dinner time.
Right.
And families are so busy today and they
Yeah.
come and they go at different, they're going to sports, they're going here, they don't sit as a family and eat anymore. And so they want company. That company is a TV or an iPad or
Right.
something going on. But yeah, and yeah, there's definitely something going on with the bullying and all of that social media with children.
Cyberbullying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Those poor kids. And I think you said in your book too, the ones that were on the drugs, it took away their ability to self-soothe. They were
Yeah.
numb. They were just numb. Like they had
Yeah. And they
no feeling. They were
didn't
like
know
zombies.
how to comfort themselves.
So when you take
And
them off the
that's,
drugs, then what?
yeah.
What are they supposed to do with that? They
Well,
go to
that's
alcohol.
why they need people to help them. I mean,
Right.
that's the other thing. All these things, helping people through trauma and preventing crime, it takes a lot of people to people experiences. And we don't have time for that. We're
No,
too busy
we're going to put
and
them
it
away.
costs too much. And, I think the investment in human relations is what we need more of and we get less of.
Right. I mean, to incarcerate costs money. Costs a lot of
Yeah.
money to put somebody, you got to house them, feed them, give them recreation. Um, as opposed to let's get them treatment. Let's
Well, I think some of them need some period to be incarcerated, but there should be
yeah,
something that helps them become the person we want them to be when they leave.
right.
And if kids go in to prison when they're 18, that's the time they're most ready for learning. And we should be teaching them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not withholding programs and using them as a reward, but helping them to become better people.
So what would you like to see in the system? What would you like if I gave you the magic wand and you change things up for these kids, what would you like to see happen?
I guess I'd like to see a lot more attention to early childhood. I think these kind of nurse visitors, well baby exams, opportunities to see families early in a child's life. And that could be very preventive in itself, because you could spot problems, whether they're emotional or physical or financial or whatever. And maybe there could be solutions found early in life. I'd like to see more attention to the needs of kids during school, more investment in attending to students as people and taking their, rather than investing in kind of exclusionary punishment and continuation school, do inclusionary punishment.
Right.
Keep kids in school.
Yeah, I think you said that one of them, or many of them, had one teacher that they still remember as being somebody positive in their
Right.
life, their influence.
And that's what I'm saying. A contact with a person can make so much difference, and we just undervalue that.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a negative contact can make a lot of difference. If a teacher shames a kid, that has a lot of impact.
It really does. I mean, I had a teacher, I remember it must have been grade 4 or 5 or something like that. And he said, "You're just so stupid." It was math. "You're so stupid." And for years and years and years, I go, "Well, I can't do math. I can't do math. Don't ask me to do that. I don't know how to, I can do English, but I can't do math." And then somebody years later, we go, "But you know how to go shopping and get 20% off. You understand that?" So years later, somebody explains it to me and I'm like, I do understand this. This is not hard. Like, I just didn't get it explained the right way for me.
And also, why would you ever say that to a child?
Because they were ignorant. Yeah. And most people don't understand this idea that subconscious is just a sponge. It's a hard drive, and stuff goes in. Doesn't care if it's right or wrong. It's just there, and it's programming.
Right. And so the good things definitely go in and make a difference.
Yeah.
And there are so many moments where you could make a difference in a child's life.
Yeah. Wow. This is a very important book you wrote. I'm really glad that we got a chance to talk about it. I'm really glad that you changed my mind on this topic. It was really, really good.
Thank you.
For you. Good for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. What's next for you?
I'm not sure. I've been thinking about what would be the next thing, but I haven't landed there yet.
Okay.
I don't think it'll be people who get married while they're
Oh, darn. I would have liked to talk about that. That's funny. That's funny. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to say goodbye to Facebook. Goodbye, Facebook. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week. And I'm just going to stop this recording.